Hey guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to Global Ventures here on Planet Coaster. Bye bye Bandito. You just saw there I deleted, destroyed, demolished the original Bandito Escape the West, which was a launched Eurofighter with a lift hill. The reason being is the classic rides collection. So the Magnificent rides came out before. We had the SLC, the Schwarzkopf looping coaster. This is the classic rides collection, which included things like the gondola, the observation tower, and this, which is a Gerstlauer Infinity coaster. Much like the Smiler at Alton Towers, also like, and at this point he forgets all the other Infinity coasters in the world. Hang Time at Knott's Berry Farm, which I thought was a Eurofighter, but apparently it's an Infinity coaster. I think the difference really between the two is an Infinity coaster has more than 2 rows, whereas a Eurofighter has 2 rows of 4 in a car, whereas an Infinity coaster is more of a train. This is the new Bandito. It will not be called New Bandito, it will continue to be called Bandito Escape the West. But I did figure, with all the DLC actually, I'm looking for excuses to add them into the park as quickly as possible. And this was a very good example of the perfect fit for the existing park. So the original Bandito was okay, wasn't my best ride. I think it was the third coaster I built in the park. So I hadn't really got to grips with the game at the time. So there were a few mistakes I made. The pacing was off, very off. The block sections, you were held on block breaks a lot of the time. So I wanted to change that first and foremost, and I was considering just rebuilding the original Bandito before the DLC was announced. And as soon as I saw that an Infinity coaster was going to be in the game, I thought, perfect. What's an excuse to actually rebuild a lot of the original, in fact, completely rebuild the entire ride, using some inspiration from the original concept, but the majority of the ride is completely new. This is me trying to experiment with different ways to get the car from the top of the building down into the basement. As you remember, the story of Bandito is you are taking part in a raid. There are bandits who are robbing the Goldlight Bank. Goldlight is the name of the town that Legend of the Frontier takes place in. I should have mentioned that actually. This is the Legend of the Frontier section of the park. So you're part of a group of bandits that are raiding the bank. I've got to try and avoid using the word raid actually, because Raid of the Fort over in the island section of the park kind of has that concept. The difference between the two is Raid of the Fort, you're kind of a bystander, a bit like Pirates of the Caribbean. You're sort of caught up amongst it all. Whereas in this ride, you are part of the story, effectively. So you are one of the bandits, and you take part in the robbery of the bank and then the escape out into somewhere in the desert, maybe even escaping to Mexico. I haven't 100% decided on that yet. It will kind of make sense if it's Mexico, because Bandito is a Spanish word. But yeah, you start off, you board the cars in the manager's office, which is kind of where you get the bank vault key from. And then the beginning of the ride is you dropping down into the vault to actually steal the gold. So I wanted to find a really clever way to get the cars from the top of the ride to the bottom into the basement. And you'll see it takes a few goes to get this right. I kind of wanted to base it off the beginnings of the Smiler. So anyone who's been on the Smiler or anyone who's watched videos of the Smiler, you will know that you start off at a slightly elevated level, and the ride starts with a slow drop down to the left into the first Heartline roll of the coaster. And that's what I wanted to replicate with this. So there's a little bit of an airtime hill there, but most of the beginning of the ride here consists of a drop, quite a steep drop down, a little airtime hill into kind of a helix type curve, and then into I think it's more of a barrel roll in this case. It's not really much of a Heartline roll, and it works. The actual sort of idea of drop, inversion, airtime hill, helix, that all stays. But the orientation of the track changes quite a lot during this episode. And I actually thought, I recorded this episode and the next 2 all in one go. I've cut it up into what were originally hour-long segments, which have now been sped up into sort of like 20-25 minutes, that kind of length. It took me a long time to do this. The first hour of recording pretty much was me trying to get this bit of the ride right. And I do kind of feel like, particularly rides that tell stories, if you don't get the beginning right, then the rest of the ride is going to be a disaster. So it was very important that I got this first bit of the ride correct, how I wanted it, because the rest of the ride then follows on from this intro, let's say. It's kind of like a good film has a good beginning. It doesn't just start and you're in the action. You know, there's always like a character motivation or something that's going on, so you kind of understand where you are with the character. And I don't want to delve too much into that. That's me using my media degree perhaps a little too much. But the story of the ride, as I said, is you're robbing a bank. So we need to go from the office to the vault. The vault originally was during the launch, so you sped past it basically in the original ride, and I didn't feel like you actually got to see the vault properly, because there's quite a bit of theming in there. There still is at this point in the video, because I haven't moved the vault at this stage. It gets moved a little bit later on. In fact, it might even get moved in the next time-lapse recording that I did. So I wanted to change that first and foremost. I wanted to make it so that you actually got to see the vault as you went past. You'll also see here, I'm trying to line up the ride with the existing building. So the front of the building will not change throughout this retheme. The queue line and everything will stay exactly as it is. The station has been elevated slightly, as you saw at the beginning. That was mainly because the exit path originally had this weird kind of like slope built into it to get it up and over the queue line. So I wanted to raise the station up a little bit more to stop that from being a problem. So the exit path should now slope naturally down into the gift shop at the end of the ride. But this was a mistake. Trying to build the ride to conform to the existing building was kind of a mistake. And this area here was where the original Heartline roll and launch started. You can see the doors at the far end there. I wanted to change that as well. So it actually ends up being inverted. The launch ends up taking place in what was originally the drop down into the basement. And as you can see, the drop has moved 90 degrees to the right. And all of this section here is now indoors. It isn't at this point, but I have now built a building around it. I would like to make this area as dark as possible. One idea I did in fact have was to make it so that where Manic Miner is, there's a mountain range, and it works really well. I was thinking of actually turning the town into like a valley town, having it in the middle of a mountain range. So have mountains behind the bank as well as on the opposite side of the square. The reason I would do that is if you put the building underground, or at least some of it underground, you will create the darkness effect that I'm looking for. I'm hoping if they ever do a sequel to Planet Coaster, they address the lighting issues a little bit, because I do understand why you can't just have something indoors be dark in a game like this, because it's too resource heavy to have it have the lighting be that dynamic. But at the same time, it is a little bit frustrating when you're trying to build a dark ride and it's still like broad daylight pretty much inside the building, and you have to bury everything underground in order to make it dark. But you know, it's part of the game. There's no point complaining about it. We just have to get on with it. Plus, if it adds a thematic element, like I just said, actually building a mountain range behind the building, that might not be the worst idea in the world. It might work out quite well. Either way, I will build some of it underground here just to cover it up a little bit. All the terraforming that you see in the original building is all redone as well. That will happen again in the next recording session, I believe. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. You can see here I'm having real trouble getting this Heartline roll to work. Eventually I make it fit perfectly under that little hill. I tried to build one using the ready-made Heartline rolls. I ended up having to build my own, and that's kind of a theme with this this track layout. Is a lot of the elements, some of which are pre-built assets, and I'm not afraid to admit that, because they are pretty good when they work well. But there are a few that I built myself. This roll is one of them. There's an Immelman type inversion that I built as well by hand. plus at the end of the ride I think there's a corkscrew that I built, maybe another inline roll somewhere. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head now. There's a few that I built myself. I should also point out, even though you're watching this probably first week of June by the time it goes up, this was actually recorded at the beginning of May, this footage, because I know that there's another series that started up Planet Coaster building an Infinity Coaster. Silverette and some others, I can't remember their name. Oh, Rudy and Operator, I think it is, have just started their Infinity Coaster build. It's a coincidence. That's what I'm saying, it's a coincidence. No one's copied anyone or anything like that. As you know, Bandito has been in the park pretty much since the beginning. I think it's like 2 years ago now I built the original Bandito. It feels like yesterday almost, but it's a long time ago. That does tend to happen, particularly in the Planet Coaster community. New DLC gets released and everyone uses it at the same time. So I did want to sort of clarify that a little bit. What else? Oh yes, records. I'm going off the top of my head here. I haven't got the game open in front of me as I'm recording this, but I believe this new version of Bandito will tie the record for most inversions in a roller coaster, which is currently 14, held by the Smiler. I do find it quite cool that it would be 2 Infinity Coasters that hold the record. You do have to sort of discount the fact that all the other Planet Coaster creations by other people wouldn't count towards the record, because I know there are some that beat the record by a long shot. The other thing, of course, to note is Global Ventures is a British theme park, so yay Britain, holding both records, or having both record holders, let's say. And I tried to keep the inversions unique. That's the other thing. So, Gerstlauer especially, they've pioneered the banana roll, which is it's kind of a cobra roll, but it doesn't flatten out on the corkscrews. It stays either embanked or inverted. I think it's just it remains. But I'm trying to think of the right terminology. The peak at the top of the inversion. It does twist enough to uninvert the rider. I think 135 degrees is the recognised banking before it becomes an inversion. So it does unbank enough for that to count as 2 separate inversions, but at the same time it doesn't unbank enough to be considered a cobra roll. So I included one of those. Originally after the launch it was a cobra roll, but the more I looked at it, I think the only Gerstlauer built coaster with a cobra roll is the Smiler, and it isn't a conventional cobra roll. It's a lot more, it's almost like turned on its, like each element of the cobra roll is kind of turned on its side a little bit, so it's still an inversion, but it's flatter than a traditional cobra roll. So it felt a bit odd to have a cobra roll on a coaster built by a company that doesn't really build cobra rolls. So that's now been replaced by a banana roll, as you'll see probably next episode, I think it is. There is one section that is a series of 2 dive loops, but again I tried to make them different, so they're not just the same dive loop each time. One was a game built dive loop and one was a custom built dive loop, and I think again they both do a very good job. There is a vertical loop which is mostly used on Eurofighters, but I think there is one Infinity Coaster that uses it. There's a Immelmann, there's a couple of Heartline rolls, but again I tried to make each one as different as possible. A couple of corkscrews, and I'm trying to think of, I think the drop from the lift hill counts as an inversion, which is a little odd. I'll have to do the count up again. If it does, then fine. The game clearly classifies it as an inversion, and I'm not going to dispute that. But at the same time, I don't think it's a true inversion, really. So I might have to sneak another one in somewhere if that is the case. As you can see here, the profile for the beginning of the ride is pretty much done now. These supports that you can see on the screen underneath the station, they're all removed because the building holds up the ride, so you don't need those supports. I did try and feed the track through the centre to begin with, but eventually I just decided it's pointless having them there because there's no need for them, so I removed them. Those doors behind, that's been replaced by a wall because that's the original launch tunnel. And this little corner here, behind the camera, is where the new vault will be situated. It'll actually be on the wall directly adjacent to the gift shop. So you might, if you're in the gift shop, actually hear some of the sound elements, sound effects that are going on within the ride itself. And this is the beginning of the launch. Now the launch on this ride is very unconventional, but thankfully, thanks to Carowinds, there is a real life example in the world now. For those of you who are familiar with a not so very well known coaster by the name of Copperhead Strike, and yes, that is said ironically, it's a very famous example of a coaster right now. Everyone's going mad for Copperhead Strike. I almost want to go to America just to experience that ride, because it sounds like a truly unique experience. But one of the things that makes it unique is it has a launch with a hump in the middle. And that is something that Bandito is also going to share. Doesn't yet, as you can see, but it will, by the end of this episode, have a double humped launch. And that was partially for excitement reasons, you know, gets the intensity of the ride up. Also, though, because the drop into the basement passes directly over the launch track, and the helix out of the first Heartline roll passes directly underneath the launch track. So I needed to make it continuously go up and down in order to thread its way through the existing track structure. So you can see me add it here. I think there's like a launch holding just to the right of the one that I'm using now. That's what I end up actually using for this. And the launch actually, I got to stop saying actually. I do apologise. The ride in, when I first viewed it, it was a little bit janky, like hopping up and down. This is me trying to find another way of threading the launch through, which wasn't particularly successful. This was before I settled on the idea of having the launch go up and down. What was I saying? Oh yeah, the little holding, the magnetic holding bit for the launch. It's a really good idea. There's just one little thing that I don't like about it, which is it starts to speed the train up before it stops it. So even though it's designed to stop, you can even see the little hold symbol on the button. It does still start to speed it up, then it stops it, then it launches it. And I'm not entirely sure that that would be what it does in real life. I think if it's designed to stop the ride, it will just stop the ride and then start the ride again. It wouldn't speed it up, stop it, and then start it again. So again, that might just be a game limitation, and I'm not going to moan too much about it, because it really doesn't matter that much in the grand scheme of things. It kind of adds like a false element into the ride, where you feel like you're about to launch and then you don't. And then you sit there on the launch track for like 5 seconds wondering what's going on, and then you get launched. And I do think that adds to the excitement of the ride a little bit. Much in the way that a holding brake on the top of a vertical drop on a dive machine sort of adds to that suspense feeling. But yeah, in a second you will actually see me settle on a final design for this launch. I spent a long time. I don't think it helped too much that I was watching TV whilst doing this. I had some POVs of other rides on YouTube in the background as well. But the majority of this was like me watching TV, getting distracted, having a chat with people. I think I was on Discord as well while I was building this with the XVI guys. So I had a lot of distractions going on while I was trying to focus on building this ride. But eventually, you see, there's me building the stop brake, and then this is the launch. The launch itself gets you up to 70 miles per hour, which is pretty damn fast. Probably the fastest ride in the park so far, this ride. I'm debating whether to build an accelerator coaster over in the opposite side of the park from here. But right now, this is the fastest ride in the park. And I think one of the great things, normally when you build these launch tracks, you kind of build the launch, you set it to a speed, but the launch track never is long enough for the ride to reach that speed. It's just to help with the acceleration to get it to the speed you actually want it to be. This one, it does actually reach the full acceleration, which I think is a really nice feature. It really adds to the excitement. You can see here it goes up and over this path, which again adds to the excitement. Drops down again, plenty of airtime on these drops. It goes a little too fast through the first hump for my liking. So you come off the launch, you drop down, and then when it valleys at the bottom, I think it goes a little too fast through that section, but I can't really change the profile of the track, and I can't really change the speed that it goes through that launch section. So a little inconvenient. But the ride in total is a really, unique experience. I'd love to actually go on this ride in real life were it to exist. It's a really, really interesting concept for a roller coaster. We are approaching the end of the video now. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but you can see me starting to build the first inversion outside of the show building, which is the banana roll. This banana roll is massive. The observation wheel, wagon wheel, the Ferris wheel that you saw me move many episodes ago now, that's dwarfed. I think you could fit 2 of them underneath this banana roll. That's how big it is. And you enter it at the full 70 miles an hour, so it had to be pretty big. The next inversion after the banana roll is my favourite of the ride, mainly because of the support structure. It actually looks really, really cool. And that's something to note, actually, with the Planet Coaster DLC. A lot of people build their own supports. Oh, this is me experimenting with vertical loops. This doesn't get built. A lot of people build their custom supports, which is fine. People are allowed to do that. But personally, I actually prefer the in-game ones. I think the in-game ones look more awesome than the custom-built ones. Because the custom-built ones, you're limited by the pieces that are available, whereas the in-game supports actually adapt to the track style that you're building. So not this inversion, not the banana roll, although the banana roll does look cool, but the next inversion I build, which I think is at the start of next episode, that has the cooler support structure in my opinion, but I'll let you guys decide for yourselves. Again, this is me experimenting with different inversion types. I wanted it to be a double inversion from the launch, but I didn't want it to be a cobra roll. So I built this sea serpent roll, which didn't really work. Tried the vertical loop, pretzel knots, things like that. None of them really worked. But yeah, I'm going to start wrapping up the episode now, guys. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. And of course, if you're enjoying the series, subscribe if you haven't done so already. Forgot my outro then. If you haven't already subscribed, be sure to hit the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed, thank you guys for your continued support. And until next time, I will see you soon.